Okay, I want to talk now about some really specific norms that, let's see, here we are, number 7, that our writing team has developed. And um, kind of a jumping off point for this. So, this is kind of part 2 of Welcome to Scientific Culture. There's a Harvard Business Review article that talks about who's got the monkey, and it's kind of talking about how a, a consistent problem that managers tend to have is actually handing things off, and it's so easy for them to um, kind of try to delegate things, but end up with it back on their desk, and it happens in really subtle ways how kind of the initiative for a project ends up not being truly transitioned to other people on the team. So, a lot of our norms about how to kind of structure a writing team, I think, actually kind of fit a similar problem. So, at some point, our group may want to kind of discuss that article and kind of implications. There's a critique later on by, or a reaction by Stephen Covey, and he talks about how there's been some shifts away from a more hierarchical manager subordinate relationship since that initial article, but he still gleans some kind of universal themes from it. Um, so, um, structure of a writing team. I identify several different roles that someone has to kind of serve. So sometimes you may have a single authored paper and one author kind of meets all of these different needs. But other times you may have several people, and there may be one person who has analytical expertise and another who kind of plays free safety and kind of hits some of the other areas. But anyway, let me go through these. So, number 1 is idea expertise. So, some people are really strong in terms of their knowledge of the literature and just coming up with interesting questions and developing an idea. Some people are really strong in terms of research design and the strongest way to kind of test a hypothesis and provide strong inferences for the theory. And related to that, some people are really strong in terms of statistical analyses. Um, some people are really strong at kind of integrating and providing a consistent narrative. And if compared to number 1, which might be more divergent creativity, some people are good at kind of cutting things down and kind of simplifying the argument and bringing them to their essence. So, as an example, I just kind of naturally am stronger here, and Josh is stronger on this one. And so we've kind of learned from each other from writing for almost 10 years now, kind of how to put on both hats, but we came to the relationship with different strengths. And then Daryl is probably stronger at this relational expertise. And so kind of smoothing over interactions both professionally and in the writing, and kind of even disagreements within the team of how to kind of approach different issues. Um, so you really need all 5 of these to have a team function really well on a writing project. And a lot of times, you're not going to have just one person who is really, really strong at all 5. Um, so, here are some norms we've kind of developed. Um, so, the first author typically takes the lead on producing a strong first draft. Um, this may start from scratch with the initial idea, or you may start with an existing data set. But this person will either run the analyses or work closely with someone who has analytical expertise, um, and they'll produce an entire draft of the manuscript. And that ends up being probably like 85% of the work on the manuscript in terms of time. It just takes a lot to kind of pull that together and do a good job where the first draft is as strong as you possibly can. Number two, the first author then circulates the manuscript to other co-authors for a line edit. We'll basically make changes directly to the manuscript. Sometimes people will get a little bit lazy and they'll just leave a lot of comments on a manuscript. What's tough about that is it's almost impossible to tell exactly what the person may have had in mind unless they actually do it. So what we try to do is have co-authors just go ahead and make the change, unless it's just going to involve massive restructuring. In that case, you may want to kind of check with the first author, but if it's reasonable to go ahead and do it, just fix it and the first author can make a decision. So what I've noticed is this seems to really allow even sometimes groups where there are strong personalities to actually work fairly efficiently, because if worst case scenario, someone isn't being responsive, or they don't kind of get the paper back quickly, or they do kind of make a lot of comments, you've already kind of laid out these ground rules, and it makes it easier to just kind of move on from their suggestions, because these were the kind of established norms to begin with. But your work as a co-author is to read the paper as though you're the last person that's going to see it. So fix everything you can. That's the way that the manuscript actually just gets stronger as it moves along, is if you really kind of become sharpened in your skills as a co-author, and within 2 or 3 days can give a manuscript a really strong read and kind of push it forward. So sometimes you may identify an issue, especially if you have analytical expertise, that needs to be addressed before you can kind of move on. So I kind of use the analogy of home building. So if there's structural damage to the basement, you might not want to put carpet in until you've repaired the crack in the basement wall. And it's usually good to read papers and kind of return them quickly. So norms differ by group. So like Josh and Daryl and I, we're usually pretty quick, so we try to turn things around within a day or two. I would say most productive teams, a week is a good rule of thumb. And if you're going to be longer than your group's norm, that's okay. But just go ahead and let the first author know. Sometimes the first author will kind of change up the circulation and get it to you later on. And then the other thing, when you're first author, you want to pay attention to, if you see the manuscript just getting kind of flooded with comments and color, people are kind of marking it up all over the place, you may want to pull it off the production line and take an hour and just go through and clear things out, accept the changes that you like, clear out any comments you can, and then send a cleaner version to the next person in the queue. So it's less helpful to get someone's feedback if there are a lot of unresolved issues on a manuscript when you send it to them. So ideally, each time the paper is getting passed forward, the prior reader has said, yeah, this is in good shape. It's as good as I can get it. Those are ideals. In practice, it may not work out exactly that way. So when the paper makes it back to you as the first author, read through, accept the changes. You might skim over things and just see if there's anything that you really didn't like the changes, but otherwise you might just accept all the changes and kind of then work through the comments one by one. So assuming you've resolved all the major issues and you're down to maybe a handful of comments, now's the time to give the paper a final OCD read and basically try to catch every single typo and mistake. So for me, I kind of purposefully don't read a paper this way until the end. But then there's a final read where I'll go through and really take my time. So it's really important to do this last step. So if there's sloppiness in the writing, a lot of times the reviewers and editor are going to make inferences about the other aspects of the process. So you have a chance to earn their trust in the small things about style and grammar so that they trust you more in other things like integrity related research design, reporting, that kind of thing. So generally speaking, if you're writing sloppy, they're going to assume other things are potentially sloppy as well. So I think it can be helpful to develop a specific routine or habit. And, at some point we may even want to, as a team, develop like a really nice checklist to kind of go through. But, kind of do this when you have plenty of energy. Don't do it when you're really tired and kind of have half a mind and your mind's drifting. A lot of times I'll print off a copy so I'm seeing it in a different mode, or maybe I'll put it on my iPad because it's easier for me to catch typos if I'm not kind of seeing it in the same format that I have been seeing it. I introduced the idea of mindful editing. There's a paper if someone wants to write that up. So some people are better at this than others, so you may want to kind of get someone that is really good at being detail oriented to help. So most of my collaborators, I think, are better than me at this. Ken, Carleen, Josh, they're all very detail oriented. This is something I have to kind of purposefully do. And then make sure you kind of check the submission instructions in terms of the length of the paper, the abstract length, what's included on the cover page, whether the paper, whether identity needs to be masked, keywords, blah, 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 blah. And then step 5, you'll create a cover letter, and we've got some examples of what this involves. And then I'm not going to kind of go through this, but we've got a couple other trainings on once you get a decision letter back, kind of how to handle that, and we actually go through kind of how to handle some of the more difficult critiques and how to think about those responses. So take a look at that. But what I will say is we found it most efficient not to completely recirculate the whole manuscript. So usually the first author will take a first crack at addressing any changes and kind of creating a response letter. And they may need to ask co-authors for help if they're, for example, if there's an analysis question they don't know the answer to, they may kind of ask for specific help on specific issues. But then once that's finalized, what we'll do is we'll send it to one other person and just have them look over the letter and see it, just, kind of put their stingy reviewer hat on and see if all of the comments seem to be fully addressed by the response letter. So I'll end with a couple of caveats. So this is our approach. It has lots of advantages. It's efficient. It's a strong way to learn. So anybody can do their best as a co-author, and you see through kind of changes that other people are making. the kinds of things that help strengthen a manuscript. It's a way, if you bring on a strong co-author to a paper you're working on, it's a way that you can increase the chance that your paper will get placed well. Um, so that said, I mean, there are lots of other ways to approach things. Some people will just split up parts of a paper, and I don't find that particularly helpful, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. I've seen some of those other strategies kind of break down, and it's definitely hard to kind of leverage effort when you try to make sure that everyone does an equal part on every single paper. Um, so, yeah. So this final point, the end game for faculty on this team. So our goal is to help you develop skills of a first author, and in particular, we want you to have expertise in especially ideas, study design, and analysis. But really, we'd like you to be developing expertise in all of these areas, and also get a sense of where you have some natural strengths, and also see what it looks like when somebody else has natural strengths in one of these areas, so that you can start kind of emulating and kind of almost putting on your hat. So, for example, for me, I put on my Josh hat when I'm trying to do integration and kind of consolidating an argument. Or, I know Ken is really strong with design and analysis. So I'll kind of put on my Ken hat and say, okay, what would Ken say about this particular section? Um, so, one of the three of us, Ken, Curleen, and I, will probably play kind of a primary role in supporting you as a first author. But we also are going to kind of work together as a team. And what we're hoping to do is kind of increasingly help you develop initiative and self-efficacy to serve in a first author role on a variety of papers. So we think if you can do it kind of once or twice with support, it won't be long, and you'll be able to kind of serve in a first author role on pretty much any paper you wanted, as long as you bring on some of the right people to kind of support your efforts on the team. So yeah, that's kind of our overall goal.